Reprise de débat. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Justice.
Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleagues have discussed many of the important features of Bill S-5 which will strengthen Canada's financial sector to its advantage. I particularly appreciate my honourable colleagues' characterization of the financial system that is only as strong as its weakest link, and for outlining some of the key areas where the government has acted, both within S-5 and elsewhere, to strengthen those links that needed most attention. Indeed, the banking sector has expressed its strong support for this mandatory legislation. For example, Terry Campbell, President of the Canadian Bankers Association, has explained that, and I quote, "In Bill S-5, the government has stepped up to the plate and is proposing that we think are very needed clarifications." I also agree with my colleagues' emphasis on the importance of considering health of the whole financial system as fundamental to the growth and success of the entire economy. With this in mind, I would like to dedicate my allotted time to considering one special crucial link in the system in which S-5 acts to fortify, and that is Canada's payment systems. Our payment systems is the set of instruments, procedures, and rules used to transfer funds amongst financial institutions, either on their own behalf or that of their customers. This is not to be confused with the various other payment instruments Canadians use, like cash, checks, debit, credit cards, to purchase goods and services, to make financial investments, and to transfer funds from one person to another. The two are not unrelated, however, because these payment instruments, with the exception of cash, normally involve a claim on a financial institution such as a bank, credit union, or Caisse Populaire. Financial institutions, therefore, need arrangements to transfer funds among themselves, which is why the payment system exists. In Canada, the national systems for clearing and settlement of payments are run by the Canadian Payments Association, also known as the CPA, a not-for-profit organization of federally regulated financial institutions. This system has served Canadian financial institutions and their customers well. But in a world of ever-changing demands, technological innovation, increased global integration and competition, no responsible and effective government can afford to let such a system remain static. And that is why Bill S-5 takes on action to ensure that this system can meet the ongoing demands of an increasingly dynamic, innovative, and globalized financial system. I must note that the CPA provided input on these measures through an open public consultation process and has told the House Finance Committee that they, and I quote, welcome the incorporation of technical and housekeeping amendments to the Canadian Payments Act legislation to provide greater clarity surrounding our membership. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the payments landscape is changing. For example, since 1996, we have seen both in Canada and abroad increasing cases where clearing and settlement systems do not include banks as direct participants. To better accommodate this development, Bill S-5 therefore proposes to amend the Payment, Clearing and Settlements Act to remove the requirement that there must be at least one bank involved. The new definition will allow more flexibility in establishing systems to clear such complex financial instruments as over-the-counter derivatives, or OTCs. This change has the added benefit of allowing the Bank of Canada to oversee the transactions of these complex financial instruments to help ensure that they pose no systematic risk to the financial system. Not only is this prudent, it is also in keeping with Canada's commitment to our G20 partners that by 2012, our OCTs be cleared through central counterparties. Bill S-5 also proposes to change the Payment Clearing Settlement Act, allowing the Bank of Canada to disclose information to other regulators of payment clearing settlement systems and to coordinate activities across current federal and provincial jurisdictions as well as with foreign regulators. This will also help us in meeting our G20 commitments by ensuring that Canadian prudential and market conduct regulators have the authority, tools, and information they need to maintain effective ongoing oversight of the Canadian OTC derivatives market. Moreover, the information sharing will help all parties understand the potential risk in these linked systems, building upon lessons learned from the 2008 financial crisis and helping our efforts with the international partners to prevent such instances in the future. Failing to form such links could actually delay our ability to link the foreign systems and undermine Canada's ability to meet the commitments of the G20 nations made. This is a key factor, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member should consider this when debating the timely passage of Bill S-5. If that doesn't convince the honourable members to get behind this bill, Mr. Speaker, I will offer another good reason. As many of the honourable members appreciate, Canada's credit unions are a valuable source of financial service in communities across the country. In fact, in recognition of the important role that credit unions play, in Budget 2010, our government created a new legislative framework for federal credit unions to accommodate growth and expansion of the Canadian credit union system and putting them on a more level playing field with other financial service providers. Once implemented through regulation, this will enable those credit unions that chose to do so to extend beyond provincial borders and pursue business strategies that are not limited by provincial incorporation. This change will encourage competition amongst financial institutions and promote a more level playing field within the financial sector, supporting a stronger and more stable system overall. It will also give credit unions a way to expand their sources of funding and diversify their geographic risk exposure. Mr. Speaker, Bill S-5 will support these efforts by amending the Canadian Payments Act so that credit unions fall within the cooperatives class in the Act rather than the bank class, giving federal credit unions a more effective voice in the CPA. I'm pleased to report that this measure has been very positively received by the federal credit unions. According to the Credit Union Central of Canada, the national voice for credit unions all across the country, these changes will help credit unions represent their members more effectively at the payments table. In the words of David Phillips, President and CEO of the Credit Union Central, placing the federal credit union in the cooperatives class will preserve and strengthen the credit union system representation at the Canadian Payments Association. It ensures that federal credit unions will be represented by a director who can bring the perspective of cooperative financial institutions to CPA matters. Of course, the credit unions will at the same time still enjoy the long-standing, well-understood and robust governance, liquidity and clearing and settlement framework that they use today. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the honourable members of this House to support the timely passage of Bill S-5 into legislation. They can do Thank you. They can do so with the confidence that by making these important improvements to Canada's payment system, they will be strengthening key links to Canada's financial system and better connecting it with the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, on this issue that we are talking about, we are debating Bill S-5. However, we're also debating part of the amendment that was actually tabled on this specific bill. And again, let's just be very clear that the amendment is really to talk about the fact that the immunity resulting from this provision could negatively impact the office's transparency and accountability to the Canadian public with respect to the S-5. And that's why we've tabled the bill to talk about transparency and accountability, which is obvious that this government is not willing to support. So again, I'm just trying to get some sense that the fact that this bill was pushed through the House through the Senate, really, and is such an important bill and a crucial bill when it comes to the well-being of finances, not only of the banks, but of Canadians as a whole, is why is it that they won't support an amendment that would assure transparency and accountability and would also prevent the time loss as a result of frivolous civil lawsuits? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Moncton, Riverview, Dieppe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for a question. We believe that the Act, when read in its entirety, has all the elements of transparency necessary to ensure the best protection of the public, and consumer protection is at the heart of this very legislation, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the member can provide a comment as to why it is the government chose to bring Bill S-5 through the Senate as opposed to the House of Commons. It seems to be an attitude of the government, and it's been demonstrated on other pieces of legislation that have come before the House, to minimize the contributions of members of Parliament on legislation. We all acknowledge that this is very important legislation, and it will pass. but why it is that the government continues to look at ways in which to minimize input and debate inside the House of Commons, where that debate should be taking place on all legislation as much as possible. So why bring it through the Senate as opposed to the House of Commons?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, this House has a very busy agenda and has very capable members, as does our second House, the Senate, which is also equally capable of coming up with very well-crafted bills such as S-5. So in their field of competency, they've come through with what we feel is a very good piece of legislation.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Tobique-Mactaquac.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Moncton Riverview Dieppe for his comments. And he did make a couple of comments toward the end where he was talking about credit unions and putting them in the cooperatives class. And as he would know, there's a tremendous amount of importance of credit unions in New Brunswick who service our rural areas. And in some cases, if it wasn't for the credit unions, we wouldn't have any services like this in our rural areas and banking services. So I'd just like him to comment, maybe take a minute to comment on the competitive aspects of this and what this is doing for credit unions and allow them to continue to build strength in our rural areas.
Honourable Member for Moncton, Riverview, Dieppe.
I think the Honourable Member for his question. Certainly, the credit unions do play a very important role in Canada's economy. Many of the credit unions are in the smaller areas where the bigger banks, of course, have pulled out because of the lack of population. And the fact that they're now becoming full members of this competitive process will, in fact, benefit consumers, because we know the credit unions, being of a smaller nature, pay very much attention to its members and certainly will offer very much more competitive rates and certainly sharpen the pencils of the bigger banks, which are sometimes subject to criticism.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member